If you haven't been watching Star Wars Andor, you've been making a mistake. It was clearly produced by people with a deep understanding and love of the Star Wars universe, and the result is some of the best Star Wars material ever put out in the modern canon. In its first few episodes, Andor introduced us to a brand new tool of Imperial dominion over the galaxy, the Corpos. These corporate police filled in for more high-profile Imperial personnel on the remote planet Ferrix, where they oversaw a laughably bad attempt to capture Cassian Andor for killing two of their own. Their poor performance might have some of you wondering how on earth sector police were this bad at their jobs, and why the Empire bothered with them in the first place instead of clamping down on their sector earlier. In this video, we'll be answering those questions.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Something we particularly liked about Andor was that the show's confident enough in its ability to convey the feel of the Star Wars universe that it didn't shove stormtroopers, star destroyers, or some other recognizable symbol in our face right from the get-go. The world building is thorough enough that it doesn't have to. The Corpos were a big part of this. Andor doesn't bother with having stormtroopers patrol every random backwater world. It starts off by setting Andor, our protagonist, up against local Imperial police, which makes more sense given the setting. These Corpos were agents of the Preox-Morlana Authority, a corporation that managed the free trade sector in collaboration with the Galactic Empire. Pre-Mor appears to have recruited its security personnel exclusively from three specific pools of people: simple thugs looking to ride power highs, authority-worshipping micromanagers with sticks up their asses, and bored professionals with nothing better to do. The result was a pseudo-police force that was both corrupt to the core and extraordinarily ineffective. Not once in Andor do we ever see the Corpos doing anything worthwhile. Our introduction to the Corpos comes in the form of two officers who openly break regulations against attending brothels and abuse their authority to mug people. Cassian Andor gave both of them what they were asking for, a broken neck and a blaster bolt respectively, and for the next few episodes the rest of the Corpos devote themselves to avenging those good-for-nothing thugs. They don't care about investigating the multiple crimes the two dead officers were responsible for. Instead, they laser in on the man who killed them, driven by indignation over someone not going along with their abuses and petty desire for revenge. To top it all off, they miserably fail at arresting Cassian. The Corpos had an anonymous informant, the element of surprise, and 12 fully armed and presumably trained soldiers to take Andor with, and he still escaped. Several more Corpos were killed in the resultant battle, and the division's performance was so unspeakably terrible that even the Empire saw fit to step in and put more competent people in charge. Since the Corpos story ends with the Empire stepping in and policing the free trade sector directly, which implies that it already had the resources to do so, it's worth asking why the Corpos existed in the first place. The likely answer is that, while the Empire had enough resources to run the sector directly by 5 BBY, it wasn't always that way. Before the Empire, after all, the galaxy operated under a federal system, with most sectors managed by local governments that ultimately answered to the Republic. Under the Empire, independent sector governments were steadily done away with and replaced with top-down military rule, but artifacts of the Republic-era federal system persisted well into the Galactic Civil War. Perhaps the best example of this was the Senate itself, which persisted with limited authority for 19 years after the rise of the Empire. Local governments and corporate entities like Pre-Mor may have been similar cases. Especially at the start of the Imperial period, the Empire likely relied on Pre-Mor and other corporations to manage far-flung sectors due to a lack of state resources. This would be especially important for Trade Federation-controlled sectors recently reclaimed for the CIS, which the free trade sector might have based its name on, where the Empire wouldn't have had reliable, pre-existing local government infrastructure. During the Republic's later years, many outlying sectors were policed and de facto owned by powerful megacorporations like the Trade Federation, which ceased to exist after the end of the Clone Wars. The Empire might have brought in loyalist companies to take over the Trade Federation's duty after the war's end, an easier solution than sending in the Imperial military to micromanage. That sort of dynamic was hardly uncommon in the Star Wars galaxy. In Legends, in fact, something similar happened on Talos' Citadel station during the Dark Wars. During a period when the Republic didn't have the manpower or the resources to police the Outer Rim, it relied on powerful private entities like Zerka Corporation to do the job for them. On Citadel Station, Zerka was brought in as a security consultant to help the badly understaffed Telos security force. And as a result, large parts of the station ended up being policed by the Zerka security division or by mercenaries hired by the corporation. As for why the Empire was still relying on incompetent corporate security to run their sectors by 5 BBY, the answer was likely just inertia. If you've got a system that works to your standards, there's no sense in replacing it until it doesn't meet your standards anymore. When you've got a galaxy to rule, it pays to delegate as many tasks as possible, both to prevent your personnel and resources from stretching too thin, and to prevent your command structure from getting too unwieldy. The Empire suffered from both of those problems anyway, of course, but stepping in to rule every individual sector directly likely made that problem worse. Delegation was important when it came to running the galaxy, but so was discretion in who you're delegating to. Having corporations like Pre-Mor run your sectors is a terrible idea, especially if you're going to rely on them for things like law enforcement. This is because those sorts of corporation governments were essentially mercenary states, and they were unreliable for the same reasons individual mercenaries were. The only loyalty corporations like Pre-Mor had was to their bank accounts, not to the empire they worked for, and certainly not to the ordinary people they were supposed to serve. That sort of attitude has a tendency to spread down through the ranks, which played into why the Corpos were so terrible. It was the same reason Zerka Corporation's security division and mercenaries were a nightmare for Citadel Station in Legends. Their real job, at the end of the day, was to protect the profit interests of their employers. Pre-Mor didn't care about things like integrity and justice until either the Empire or their account balance said they had to, and as a result, nor did most of the people they hired. They and their employees were mercenaries, and they had the priorities of mercenaries. Mercenary forces like the Corpos were bound to only have a handful of people who actually cared about their jobs beyond the paycheck, and those types usually cared about the wrong things anyway. Generally, they overcompensated for the lackluster morale of their colleagues, much like Sergeant Mosk and Deputy Inspector Khan. They were usually either bloodthirsty, as in the case of Sergeant Mosk, or they were the sort of authority worshippers that should never be allowed within 100 meters of a position of power, as in the case of D.I. Khan. To return to the two corpos from the first episode of Andor, easy access enforcement jobs like those offered by Pre-Mor tended to draw recruits who were perfectly happy to abuse their newfound authority. This was a big problem the Empire had in general. A lot of its personnel were just thugs in uniforms. A government with its priorities straight would ideally filter out those types of recruits, but neither the Empire nor Pre-Mor had decent priorities, and so flagrant authority abuse was rampant in the Star Wars universe. All of this, plus assuredly lackluster corporate training, is a recipe for the worst possible law enforcement you could possibly ask for. In other words, the Corpos. It really says something about the Corpos that Andor had us rooting for the Empire of all things when the ISB came in and fired them all. But the Corpos' incompetence aside, they were a great part of the new worlds this series has shown us. We're excited to see where Andor goes next, and we hope you are too. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on the Corpos? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.